The True Fertile Crescent. Part 1. The Cradle of Civilization. Have you ever wondered why the region of the earth mistakenly referred to as the Fertile Crescent is neither fertile nor shaped like a crescent? Together, Iraq, Syria, and Jordan possess some of the most desolate land known to man. This region is extremely arid and was equally arid 6,000 years ago, regardless of how well irrigated the river valley. The True Fertile Crescent. Part 1. The Cradle of Civilization. Have you ever wondered why the region of the earth mistakenly referred to as the Fertile Crescent is neither fertile nor shaped like a crescent? Together, Iraq, Syria, and Jordan possess some of the most desolate land known to man. This region is extremely arid and was equally arid 6,000 years ago, regardless of how well irrigated the river valleys were. Dependence on irrigation alone rules out Mesopotamia's candidacy for the true biblical paradise. Land suitable for farming is sparse, and fresh water even sparser. The only area found near this alleged cradle of civilization, which is remotely fertile, is Kurdistan, with its scenic green highlands. However, Adam and Eve would have been unable to dwell in these mountains due to their frequent freezing temperatures. Some of these peaks snow year-round. The paradise of Eden displayed a distinctly subtropical climate, seeing as how its inhabitants were able to dwell without clothing or fire altogether. When we scan maps for a fertile, crescent-shaped area in the Middle East, Africa, Asia, the Pacific, or Europe, we find no such distinguishable region. That is until we cross the Atlantic and lay eyes upon the Gulf of Mexico, the very source of the miraculous Gulf Stream. These life-giving waters keep the Gulf Coast in a constant state of agreeable climate. It will be shown in this presentation that the Gulf of Mexico is the one and only true Fertile Crescent, and thus Florida, the Garden of Eden. Now enjoy.
Sorry to interrupt.
Are you okay?
I need to get out of a toxic relationship.
Why don't you start by telling us...
Welcome to Florida, baby.
Introducing Dr. Narco Longo.
There is only one consistently fertile, crescent-shaped landmass on the Earth today. This perfect crescent extends from the tip of Florida to the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. The coastline therein possesses Earth's most agreeable, subtropical climate, the highest concentration of freshwater springs in the world, a myriad of abundant produce, and not to mention thousands and thousands of pyramids. The Gulf Coast, Caribbean islands, and Bahamas display such lush vegetation and agreeable climate as to put the Mediterranean Sea and its barren coastlines to shame. The amniotic waters of the humid Gulf average 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the dehydrated, chilly Mediterranean. This is due entirely to the Gulf's sacred designation as the source of the Gulf Stream, the mother of all oceans, as will be discussed shortly. In this respect, the Middle East, again, comes up empty-handed. Florida is Eden. From its very inception as a European colony, Florida was likened to the Garden of Eden. In fact, on Columbus's third voyage to the so-called New World, he professed the lands he encountered around the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico to be the one and only earthly paradise. Interesting how they leave that part out of history class, yet endlessly subject us to Arab-centric propaganda furthered by countries who would have virtually no global relevance save for the fact that they erroneously claim host to the birthplace of the Abrahamic religions. Up until World War II, it was not uncommon to hear Florida professed as the original Garden of Eden, as Arab-centric propaganda had not been cemented into our school systems. Land advertisements and articles of the pre-war eras reflect a seemingly widespread acknowledgement of this fact. A 1912 booklet, distributed by the Tampa Board of Trade, professed, "Florida climate proves that original Garden of Eden was located there." On the 8th of February, 1910, the Tampa Tribune printed that, quote, "The Garden of Eden was in Florida." The Tampa Tribune similarly printed the following on March 11, 1919. General Richard E. Edmonds is correct. Only the extremely ignorant and supremely jealous now deny that here was the original Garden of Eden. Not only was the original Garden of Eden in Florida, much more to the point, it is still here, and there are no rivals. End quote. Dozens and dozens of articles and land advertisements echo the same consensus.
At Sprouts, we work with the best farmers and trusted brands to bring you great products that help you keep feeling your best. This week, get 20% off vitamins and body care with the Sprouts account. Come talk to our wellness experts. We're here to supplement your health this season at Sprouts.
Mesopotamia translates to the land amidst the rivers. In Genesis, 4 rivers went out of Eden: the Euphrates, the Pison, the Gihon, and the Hiddekel, also known as the Tigris. Of the modern Mesopotamia's erroneously attributed rivers, only the Tigris and Euphrates flow today, and the identities of the other 2, the Pison and the Gihon, are entirely up for debate. Keep in mind, within the mainstream narrative, the area of Iraq, Syria, and Jordan, labeled the cradle of civilization, required extensive irrigation to render their largely barren land remotely fertile, which automatically disqualifies it from the candidacy for Eden. Another truth, which is lost on scholars, is the fact that these 4 rivers came to a single head. This feature is not to be found on any of the eastern continents. Believe it or not, it is in Lake Seminole, located exactly on the Florida-Georgia line, that we find the planet's only true 4-headed river system. The 4 physical rivers of Eden are the Chattahoochee, Fish Pond Creek River, the Spring Creek River, and the Flint River. These 4 ancient names were carried to Asia on the Ark during the flood and reassigned to the 4 closest major rivers. This is how Eden was lost. But the Gulf Stream persisted, and thus the same unique ecosystems of Florida took hold again, and paradise was restored. This fact was uncovered by Christian theologian and lawyer L.V.E. Calloway, Florida's Republican candidate for governor in 1936, who was ordained a Baptist preacher at only 17 years old. Calloway was sent on a mission from God by none other than Dr. Brown Landone, renowned Florida mystic and author. Landone instructed Calloway to move from central to northern Florida after initiating him into what was called the Order of Melchizedek. After relocating to the Apalachicola River area, just outside of Tallahassee, Calloway found that of the 28 trees identified in the Bible, 27 of them grew in this unique Florida River Valley. We will return to the research of E.E. Calloway later on. Mississippi translates to either gathering in of all the waters or father of waters. Hearing the words father and waters together should prick the ears of anybody who is familiar with Genesis, the first book of the Bible. Meso is the same phonetic root found in the words Mexico and Mississippi. Mesopotamia could justly be referred to as Mexopotamia or Mississippotamia. Assuming the 4 rivers of Eden to be in Florida, we assert the original Nile River and its deltas, nicknamed the River of Isis, to be the Mississippi River and its deltas. The name Mississippi actually contains the name of the Egyptian goddess Isis within it. An alternate identity of the River Nile has been entertained by a multitude of free thinkers, including some of the very first European settlers, slaves, the founders of the Mormon religion, and modern revisionist movements such as Tartaria and Old World, as well as the Black Israelite movement. At the very least, most people should be able to agree that the Mississippi River, Gulf of Mexico, and Caribbean are the mirrored equivalent to the Nile and Mediterranean Sea.
Families throughout the history of man have been chosen to make this decision. Your family must choose to willingly sacrifice one of the 3 of you to prevent the apocalypse.
We're not sacrificing anyone. You guys are delusional.
I'm on my family's side.
My son is gonna die.
I saw the light.
Time's running out on the world. Make a choice.
Rated R.
On most vacations, you take a trip. But in Israel, you'll take a journey you'll never forget. Here you'll experience things so extraordinary, from the inspired to the inspiring, the humble to the truly humbling, where people come to learn, laugh, connect in a country with thousands of years of recommendations. What you see, touch, and feel in Israel you'll never experience anywhere else. Begin your journey to Israel now.
The land of the crescent moon. For those not yet convinced, you are about to be. If the Gulf of Mexico is the true Fertile Crescent, it would thus be the home of at least one Abrahamic religion. Now, Islam actually brandishes the Fertile Crescent, symbolized by the crescent moon and the planet Venus, the 2 luminaries which govern over fertility, as its primary symbol. Well, what if I told you that Islam actually originated in the Gulf of Mexico? For it was certainly present in the Americas well before Columbus's arrival. Don't believe me? Take a look at these so-called Native Americans. The Muskogee tribe of the southeast United States, also known as Creek or Seminole, bear the same phonetic root, mus, as Muslim, as do the native Muspa of Florida. Muscogees dress in a distinctly Moorish style that well suits the Moorish architecture scattered around the southeastern United States and Caribbean islands. Not only do the Muskogee dress in what could be described as Muslim garb, but the Muskogee Confederacy even employed a crescent moon and star insignia identical to that of Turkey and Morocco. In fact, dozens of nations use a variation of the Moorish crescent, and if I were searching for the remnants of a pre-Columbian transatlantic empire in the Americas, that's where I would start. With this understanding, I'd like to show you a supposedly satirical map displaying the divvying up of America should the Central Powers have defeated us in World War I. This map was printed by Life magazine. The Ottoman Turks were explicitly given claim to Florida. Interesting to say the least. When we examine the overtly Turkish architecture of Tampa Bay, we see this is no coincidence. What if I told you Florida actually has a Turkey key, sitting directly next to Mormon Key? I think we should also re-examine the name of the islands, Turks and Caicos, which we are told are named purely for a fez-wearing cactus, nothing to do with the Turks. New Smyrna, Florida, a 1767 Ottoman colony, is, however, legitimately named after a Turkish city. So, is this map showing us an alternate destiny or an alternate history? A little-known fact, the Muskogee tribe of Florida actually allied with Montezuma, the Aztec emperor, against his colonial foes. Another undeniable link between the Gulf of Mexico and a pre-Columbian Muslim empire is the fact that the language family to which the Aztec languages belong is the Otomanguean family. Otomanguean is Ottoman. The crescent moons of the Gulf of Mexico are indeed Islamic in origin. Do you know where the word Caribbean comes from? It is named for the Carib people who were native to its islands as well as the Gulf and Florida. Carib is nearly the same word as Arab, and this is no coincidence. If they had named the Caribbean Sea the Caribic Sea, the truth would likely have been too obvious. This area is perhaps most famous for piracy, which, all propaganda aside, is a largely Arabic or Semitic culture. The two most pirated areas of the colonial world were the Islamic Barbary coast of Africa and the potentially Islamic Gulf and Caribbean. The pirate cutlass was inspired by the Arabic scimitar. The word pirate comes from the word pyro, as in pyrite, meaning flaming or red. This is the same adjective from which the Phoenicians get their name, as do the Rus, Vikings of Eastern Europe and Asia. This gives new meaning to names like Barbarossa, meaning red beard. The Prophet Muhammad was known to have red hair and a red beard, did he not? Ironically, Florida's 7,000-year-old bog burials, consistent with those in Europe, yielded specimens featuring European DNA and red hair.
Planning a trip, but want to stay flexible? Kayak searches hundreds of travel sites to show you which hotels and vacation rentals offer free cancellation, so you can book now and adjust later if plans change. Kayak. Search one and done.
Lorenz is re-examining sections of DNA called haplogroups in the brains of 5 Windover people. He's looking for haplogroups found only in native North Americans because finding them would corroborate all previous work.
When I sequenced larger fragments and I was looking for the sites that I know are characteristic of Native American haplogroups, I was surprised because I did not find them.
In contrast to all previous findings, Lorenz couldn't confirm the Windover people were Americans. Further investigation revealed something even more remarkable.
I went back to the screen and I looked at the sequences again. The first person's DNA, it looked European. When I looked at the second one, it looked European. When I looked at the third, fourth, and fifth, they were slightly different from the first two, but they looked European.
Lorenz had found DNA unlike any other from Native Americans.
The word Mecca is rooted in the words Olmec and Mexico. In fact, when Europeans first arrived, the native Floridians even had a massive quote-unquote mosque made from stone in Florida named Tolo Mecco. Unsurprisingly, the words Muskogee, Meskwaki, and Mascogo all bear the word mosque within them. For those that don't know, officially, Seminoles are Native Americans mixed with both runaway slaves and Irish, Scottish, and Welsh renegades, often bearing names like Mick and Mac. But we are told it is a coincidence that this tribe goes by the name Miccosukee. Micco is the same phonetic thread from which we get Mezzo, Mexo, and yes, Mecca. Cuba is the Kaaba, the land of the cube. The island of Cuba is actually the tail of the largest Q in the world. Its name is no coincidence. Many Seminoles escaped persecution to Cuba and settled there, some temporarily and others permanently. Cuba is also the name of a city in Alabama, Muskogee Territory. Q is the letter which represents fertilization. It displays an egg being actively fertilized by a sperm. The letter Q will be the topic of a later video. This letter of fertilization symbolizes the amniotic waters of the Gulf Stream, which perpetually emit from the Gulf of Mexico. It is the Gulf Stream and its destinations alone which survive the periods of mass freezing in the northern hemisphere. In periods of temperance, such as our current age, the Gulf Stream supplies warm, nourishing waters to northern locations that would otherwise not be able to host the vegetation they do today, such as Iceland and Helsinki. We will return to the Gulf Stream later in this presentation. Did you know that in the exact same regions of America, where we find Moorish architecture and Moorish-looking people, we also find a plethora of biblical place names as well as Moorish insignia on flags and crests? The following states all belonged to Muskogee or Creek territory. Florida, with its overtly Moorish architecture in all corners of the state, has cities with names such as Baghdad, Crescent City, Golden Crescent, Tallahassee, a city which has been referred to as the Rome, Jerusalem, and Athens of ancient America by multiple scholars. Moorhaven, Isla Morada, Arcadia, New Smyrna, Marathon, Zephyr Hills, Naples, Venice, St. Petersburg, Alachua, Bowell County, El Portal, El Jardín, Garden Nile, Yalafa, Alafaya, Malabar, and many more. In Georgia, named for the same George as the country Georgia, previously part of both the Ottoman and Tartarian empires, we also find a plethora of Moorish architecture, as well as cities with names like Bethlehem, Athens, Hephzibah, Rome, Salem, Smyrna, Cairo, Arabi, Zebulon, The Rock, Albany, Alpharetto, Alapaha, Hiram, Jachin, Zion, Moreland, Ephesus, Ta'alapusa, Da'alis, and O Mecca. In Alabama, with its distinctly Arabic prefix, we find cities such as Arab, Andalusia, Athens, Dothan, Joppa, Sardis City, Boaz, Troy, Alexandria, Alexander City, Alabaster, Al-Tuna, At-Allah, Ta'ala-Dega, and Mabilla, the true name for Mobile, which is actually Alabama backwards, and of course a plethora of Moorish architecture. In Mississippi, the land of the river Isis, we find Mount Olive, Carthage, Beulah, Gilead, and another Athens. In Tennessee, Medina, Memphis, Athens, Carthage, Alexandria, Moscow, Smyrna, Tallahassee. South Carolina, which was initially part of Spanish La Florida, touts the unmistakably Arab crescent moon as its flag to this very day. We are told originated as a Confederate symbol.
Nearly all water used indoors is reclaimed, highly treated, and safely recycled back to Lake Mead, which extends our water supply.
In Louisiana, where the river Isis terminates, we find Amite, New Iberia, Lake Maurepas, Des Allemands, Allah, Arcadia, Athens, Homer, Alexandria, Iota, Sicily, Delhi, Venice. Did you know, however, that New Orleans, the mouth of the river Isis, is nicknamed Crescent City? They say this is due to a crescent-shaped bend in the river, but this excuse is nonsense. Old sewer lids from the city, displaying Islamic iconography, easily debunk this. Arkansas, named for the ancient wooden ark ships which traced its abundant Mississippian coastline, contains the most biblical city names of any American state. In this one state we find Antioch, Athens, Bethel, Bethlehem, Beulah, Canaan, Corinth, Damascus, Egypt, Gethsemane, Goshen, Hebron, Jericho, Jerusalem, Jordan, Lebanon, Mount Judah, Mount Nebo, Mount Olive, Nimrod, Palestine, 4 Salems, 4 Shilohs, Siloam, Smyrna, Zion, Lepanto, and my favorite, the most telling of all, Arkadelphia. Texas is the Lone Star State. That lone star is either Sirius, the star in the east, or Venus, the morning star, both of which are especially revered by Islam, and trade places as the star in the clutches of the crescent moon. South Carolina is the crescent, and Texas is the star. In Texas, we find Palestine, Iran, Memphis, Abilene, Hebron, Nazareth, Dallas, Alamo, Odessa, Athens, Zephyr, Rome, Corsicana, and Ahamuda. You may have noticed an abundance of Greek names like Smyrna, Philadelphia, Arcadia, etc. Do you think it is any coincidence that every single state previously under native Creek territory has a city by the Greek name of Athens? Well, what if I told you that Creek is the same word as Greek? That may sound like a leap, but many researchers have remarked on the perplexing yet undeniable Greek contribution to native languages of the American Southeast. We will return to the topic of Greek presence in pre-Columbian Florida later on. Part 2. Giants and Old Men of Renown. Amorites and Canaanites. When Dr. Pedro de Santander wrote the following to his king in July of 1557, he used a very interesting choice of words to describe the people of Florida. "It is lawful that your majesty, like a good shepherd, appointed by the hand of the eternal Father, should tend and lead out your sheep, since the Holy Spirit has shown spreading pastures whereon are feeding lost sheep, which have been snatched away by the dragon, the demon. These pastures are the New World, wherein is comprised Florida, now in possession of the demon, and here he makes himself adored and revered. This is the land of promise, possessed by idolaters, the Amorite, Amalekite, Moabite, Canaanite. This is the land promised by the eternal Father to the faithful, since we are commanded by God in the Holy Scriptures to take it from them, being idolaters, and by reason of their idolatry and sin, to put them all to the knife, leaving no living things save maidens and children. Their cities robbed and sacked, their walls and houses leveled to the earth." End quote. Robbing, sacking, and leveling is exactly what the Spanish would do in Florida for a period of about 300 years. But let's take a look at those specific names used to describe native Floridians. Amorite, Amalekite, Moabite, and Canaanite. These are the very names used in the Old Testament to describe the ancient tribes of what we are today told is Arabia, the Holy Lands, Phoenicia, and Africa. So, was Dr. Pedro poetically employing these names simply for dramatic effect, or was he candidly relaying accurate information to his monarch, albeit with religious fervor? I tend to agree with the latter. The price for misleading a king was severe back in those days, so I have a hard time looking past these revelatory titles. And believe me, slanderous labels such as Canaanite were not needed to justify crimes the Spanish were already accustomed to committing. Amorite is a very revealing word, as it is nearly synonymous with Phoenician and more. One could even make the case that the word America comes from the word Amuri, the homeland of the Amorites. According to academia, Canaan, believed to be modern-day Israel and Lebanon, is the alleged homeland of the Phoenicians. Though certainly a Phoenician colony, I do not believe it to be their homeland. The original Phoenicians, who were actually Finnish, come from the true North Pole, near Helsinki, Finland. Nonetheless, Norse seafarers were in Florida thousands of years before the dawn of Egypt's first dynasty. This is substantiated by the European DNA recovered from the Florida bog bodies. These burials are identical to ones in Scandinavia, but academia does absolutely nothing to address this fact. The following articles highlight the ample evidence of Phoenician presence in the pre-Columbian Americas.
The population of Philadelphia is about 2 million people. That makes it the 6th largest city in the U.S. Did you know that we are, in effect, adding a new city the size of Philadelphia to our country every year? That's how many illegal immigrants came into the United States in 2021 and will in 2022. I totally get why people want to come here. I'm sure I'd do the same if I were in their shoes. In America, they can earn more money than where they're from. In America, there's the rule of law. In America, there's opportunity. And in America, there are generous government benefits, housing subsidies, free education for their kids, free medical care. That's the illegal immigrant side of the story, and it makes perfect sense. But what about our side of the story, the American taxpayers' side of the story. Do we get a say in this? Seems like we should. It's estimated that Americans spend $200 billion a year to house, feed, school, and care for illegal immigrants. If you say that we're a rich country, that these people are fleeing poverty and war, and it's simply the compassionate thing to do for us to let them come here and stay here, then I would ask, where do you draw the line? If you draw the line at all. Should we let anyone from anywhere into the country? Wouldn't that be the compassionate thing to do? The people who come across our
Giants of old. Is wordplay all we have to back up our theory? Absolutely not. There are two issues that scholars shy away from entirely when trying to pinpoint the cradle of civilization. The first of these issues is the fact that men of immense stature, titans even, were known to exist in the aforementioned lands during biblical times. The Anakim are the most commonly referenced giants in the Bible. The Anakim dwelled in Moab, Canaan, and the surrounding areas. But as we just heard, those lands may very well be Florida. The word Anakim can even be linked with the name Abenakis, an ancient mound-building culture from Sarasota, Florida, which bears the same root as Saracen, a medieval name for Muslims. Believe it or not, while rich in archaeological findings in general, the Middle East does not yield as many skeletons of impressive stature, nor are the people currently dwelling there of any noteworthy height. Quite the opposite, actually. E. Calloway had the following to say in regards to America's forgotten legacy. With the exception of the Aztecs, we have erroneously assumed that all the peoples who lived in the Western Hemisphere before the white man came here were Indians. We now know that is not true, but that a large, non-warlike people lived here even before the Indians, and that their physical attributes, habits, and manner of living were as different from the Indians as the Indians differ from the white man. We have also erroneously assumed that this is the New World and that Asia is the Old World. From the skeletons of the giants and evidence of their great works in Mexico and Peru, and from the ancient temples and ruins of the Western Hemisphere, I am convinced that the genesis of man was in the Western Hemisphere and not in Asia. Some of the skeletons uncovered in the Western Hemisphere became skeletons before man even learned the art of embalming or mummifying." End quote. Some may think the concept of giant humans is entirely fantasy, but this could not be further from the truth. The United States, with Florida in particular, bears an alarming amount of quote-unquote giant skeletons. It would be impossible to list all the known records of unusually large bones found in the southeastern United States between the years 1860 and 1960 alone. To list those in Florida would require hours of narration. For the sake of brevity, we will skim through a selection of articles from one publication alone, the Tampa Bay Times, and its subsidiaries, between the years 1890 and 1960. This should emphasize just how prevalent giant men were in pre-Columbian America. On the 6th of September, 1914, the Tampa Bay Times printed the following title: "Bones of Real Giants Found." These averaged over 7 feet in height. In 1922, Big Mound yields giant skeleton. This specimen actually measured over 9 feet in length. In 1925, skeletal remains of giant discovered. In 1927, amateur archaeologists find remains of Florida giants near Fort Myers. In 1955, who were the Glades giants? Were they born that way, or did ancient Indians use bone-stretching formula? Dozens of articles reflect the same findings in the mounds of Florida. Keep in mind, all of these skeletons were uncovered within about 70 years of each other, in Florida alone. Unfortunately, virtually all of these bones excavated from the mounds of Florida were handed over to the Smithsonian, where they have been kept from the public's attention ever since. thus helping to shift the public's perception of giants from reality to fantasy. But do we have any evidence of living, breathing giants in Florida? The answer is yes. The Timucua civilization, who ranged from the Tampa Bay area to modern South Carolina, were some of the very first natives encountered by the Spanish and French conquistadors. The French had the following to say in regards to this tribe's extraordinary height. This chief, Athor, is an extremely handsome man, intelligent, reliable, strong, of exceptional height, exceeding our tallest men by 1.5 feet, and endowed with a certain restrained dignity, so that in him a remarkable majesty shone forth. End quote. I have found evidence that the tallest man on the French expedition stood around 6'3". This would make the Timucua close to 8 feet tall. Even in a scenario where the tallest French was only 5'6", this would still make the Timucua 7 feet tall. It should be noted that not all native Floridians were giants. Even the Timucua were a group of tribes primarily united by language alone. Thus, when the Spanish arrived, they gave a more moderate but still impressive height for a separate branch of the Timucua, saying that they averaged at least a full 4 inches taller than Europeans. It should also be noted that the height of the Timucua fell considerably after their integration into Spanish missions, indicating that they were malnourished. The Carib people, from which we get the name Caribbean Sea, inhabited the West Indies and parts of Florida. The Caribs, though likely a title encompassing many different tribes, were also said to average 7 feet tall at the time of Spanish arrival.
Every investor out there, they all know they're supposed to diversify their portfolio, and that means purchasing real estate, but they never wanted to take that tax hit. But now, with the Opportunity Zone program, they can.
Remember the Seminoles of Florida, who also go by the name Creek, Muskogee, and Miccosukee? Well, despite their little understood genetic makeup, the average height for a Seminole man in the 1950s was 6'4", with many individuals surpassing that height. To find Seminole men under 6 foot was highly unusual, and such outliers were likely adopted into the tribe during later conflicts, and therefore not representative of the tribe's true height. The following article of the Tampa Bay Times, dated January 10, 1960, addresses this peculiarity. Indians were 6 feet tall. Not as an anthropologist, but as a layman who knows personally many of the present-day Seminoles, Mr. Devane lists those he knows to be 6 feet or taller. And Billy Bowlegs III adds the names of others who have passed on to their happy hunting grounds. Chipko was about 6 foot, 2 or 3 inches tall. His brother, who was the first chief of the Seminoles in Oklahoma, called Long John, was 6 feet 6 inches tall. His brother, who was the father of Chief Tallahassee, was over 6 feet. His niece, Martha Tiger, was almost 6 feet, and of the 3 Tom Tigers, all were over 6 feet. Captain Tom Tiger was 6 foot 6 inches and weighed almost 300 pounds, according to his son Naha, who had recently died. Billy Bowlegs III said these Seminoles, now deceased, were 6 feet and over. Old Cypress Charlie and his 4 sons, Whitney, Wilson, Futch, and Charlie Cypress, Old Charlie and son Sam Huff, Big Charlie, 6 feet 4, Coffee Gopher, Tom Jumper, Josie Jumper, Charlie Peacock and his brother, John, Tommy Doctor and Jimmy Doctor. Those living whom I can recall are Reverend Henry Cypress, 6 feet 4, Sam Toney, Jack, John, and Frank Tommy and their grandfather, Old Tom, Jumper, Tom, and Morgan Smith, the largest man among the Seminoles. Joe and Toby Johns, Willie and John Henry Gopher, Johnny Jash and his son. Only a few of the older deceased have been mentioned.
Alright, y'all, so, yeah, I was just making some merch, Las Vegas. You guys, you know what I'm saying? Hold on. Las Vegas merch. So if y'all, want to check it out, y'all in Vegas. Boom. Look at that. Las Vegas. Boom. Bang, bang. All right. So shout out to Billy. Made those for him. I just came across this video on YouTube, man. Crazy. Might rewrite history. The true Fertile Crescent. Okay, yeah. So, shit. I mean, some of y'all might be interested. Some of y'all might not. I'm definitely interested in this type of stuff. So, pretty cool. Just something to consider. You want to watch the rest of that? Go to this channel, Old World Florida, and go watch the video yourself. Okay. Thank you very much. Have a